ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Zombie Train. This is episode 225. We are in the thick of it, and we've got a long way to go before we get to anything real special. But 225, this is an episode... sorry. Of course, as I go over every episode, the footage from this is from Under Construction, which will be released at around the same time if you want to hear it in real time, hear me talk about baseball, among other things, and have me receive feedback about the route we're working on. That's the important part of that series. Then go ahead and watch that as well. So anyways, let's move right along to the question. This is a question about celebrations, and I'm going to go pick up the exact wording. It's by Eastrail, written by Eastrail in episode 201. So we've moved on from the episode 200 questions. Zombie Train 201. There we go. I'm going to turn off my volume because I don't have my headset in for once. Okay. This was the episode called Little Engines. Of course. I heard they're really useful. Anyways, Eastrail 11 asks, in this time, would you still celebrate the holidays like Thanksgiving, Christmas, or other holidays and birthdays? Now, this is actually a really good question. I like this question. And first, I want to get the morbid thing out of the way. We did a lot of celebrating. We did a lot of celebrating, I suppose, funerals. Just because it was a thing that happened often enough. So, that out of the way, we did, not that out of the way, but in that vein, we did try to mourn when we lost somebody. And even though sometimes we didn't have a lot of time to do that, and especially most of the time we didn't have a body to deal with. Usually you didn't want a body to deal with, you'd burn it as quickly as possible, just in case. Even if you knew they weren't infected, you don't want to leave a decomposing body around. You can only get infected while you're alive, by the way. You can't, die from other causes and then come back as a zombie. That doesn't work. So, that's out of the way. We did do a lot of mourning. At the same time, though, we did plenty of celebrating. We did plenty of, these things. Birthdays weren't nearly as important. And additionally, we rarely gave each other gifts. That's the other thing. We rarely did gifts. We rarely set up anything, although, for Christmas, it's like, oh, let's get a tree and put it in the dining car, or in the lounge. Which we did that a couple of times. That was ridiculous. And then we got a little one that was 2 or 3 feet tall. That was not actually a tree. So we just kept it and stuck it in storage for most of the year. But that was the biggest one. That and Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving, actually, we would typically make a point to set up something for everybody nearby, We would probably find ourselves in a town or a settlement or something, and that's the day where, it's Thanksgiving, everybody sort of bands together, puts in what supplies they have. That's the big meal day. It wasn't so much Christmas because, of course, not everybody was Christian, although, Christmas is hugely commercialized in the U.S., so it doesn't really matter. But Thanksgiving, especially if you're American, it was a sort of day of, well, let's just sit down with one another and share supplies and talk and, maybe try to come to some sort of agreement if there wasn't one had already. It was a day of peace. Christmas is something we typically enjoyed on the road if we could be. Of course, that's during the winter and there is snow. Due to the influx of people up north, hundreds of thousands of people, if not millions of people, escaping into Canada, and, in this example, Canada, and lighting campfires and burning out the forest and blah, 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 blah. There was actually, a haze which lowered the average temperature of the area by a couple of degrees. It was almost like a nuclear winter, but it wasn't nuclear at all. It didn't last very long, but its effects were known. Things got pretty cold. Now, so if we were on the road for Christmas or Thanksgiving, then we would celebrate on the road. You know, we'd acknowledge the holiday. Most of the other more minor holidays fell by the wayside. Like, you know, I know Easter isn't that minor of a holiday, but that's kind of like the first thing down in the list where we decided, no, you know, it isn't really worth celebrating Easter, because what do you do for Easter, really? You give people candy if you're not going to church. And there were a couple of communities we were in that were very religious and that had these kind of, you know, that had Easter Mass and stuff like that, and we would participate sometimes. You know, it's not, you know, we weren't necessarily out there for years and years and years and years, of course. We were only, as the zombie train not incorporated, as the zombie train for a few years, so we didn't really have that kind of, you know, opportunity to see a lot of variance. But we did a lot of travel. We spent a Christmas on the road. I think we spent 2 on the road. We spent one, like, back in Quonset. We spent a Thanksgiving. Oh, well, the first Christmas was spent on the road, and it was kind of glossed over completely. We celebrated New Year's when we were in Portland. And that was something, you know, that's when you kind of forget. It's like, oh, you know, it's the calendar, whatever. Or, you know, it's the new year. You know, flip over the calendar, but oftentimes you'd lose track of days and stuff like that. It would honestly be kind of tricky to keep an eye on what day it was. You know, we get a calendar set up, but if somebody forgets, you know, oh, is it Sunday or Monday or whatever, then then you've got to, like, synchronize your watch, so to speak, with another town that actually has kept time. And so you see a lot of people falling back on, okay, well, you know, the crops are ripe, it's time to harvest, instead of, oh, you know, it's September 25th. Which additionally is why birthdays kind of lost their meaning, because we sometimes could not tell what the date was. Even people with watches that kept the date, or computers, you know, sometimes you'd have a power hiccup and the computer would forget, and, you know, if you don't reset that right away, it might be the only thing that's really holding the date, or, you know, somebody's watch battery would die. Or, like my watch, it goes up to 31 every month. If you forget which months have 31 in them, or which ones have less, you forget to tick it over, and now it's off by a little bit. So, there were pretty easy ways to lose track of the date, and we did that pretty often. So it was like, oh, you know, we figured out what date it was. Thankfully, while we were going over the past, I knew what date it was. But while just from on the day to day, it was difficult. You know, is it the weekend? Is it the week? You know, we would have estimate as to, you know, how long it would take to get somewhere, but that's really the only way we'd judge time. It would be in X number of days from now, and then we would just start counting that down, basically. So, some of these date-oriented holidays lost a lot of their meaning. We did find places which celebrated the harvest. Now that is something, you know, a holiday that sort of made a comeback. Not really a holiday, but definitely a day of celebration. It's, you know, it's harvesting time, or it's planting time, or whatever, because a lot of these agrarian communities managed to stay on their own, or at least stay alive, because they could produce their own food. They didn't have to go scavenging, and therefore they didn't have to worry about a lot of things. All they had to do... All they had to do was keep their area secure, and that wasn't necessarily a new thing for them. The only problem is most, if not all animals, have a, like, fairly strong aversion to anything with salam. If there is a zombie in the, you know, wandering around outside the cow pen, all the cows are going to be on the other side of the pen, pressed up against the fence, or they're going to be going through that fence. So that's what made things difficult for them, but in the end it wasn't, you know, the end of the world may not really have been the end of the world for them. It just made life a little bit harder. But, speaking of the end of the world, actually, the most important day, when you remembered it, the most important day that everyone would mark was December 21st. And that was easy because that was the winter solstice. But the important thing about it is that was the day of the Great Panic. And so you can measure, a year has gone by. That was the shortest day of the year. It's been a year since the war started. Or, it's been 2 years since the war started. And there was never really an official end to World War Z because there was no war declared. It's not like you were waging war in a particular state or country. It was just, zombies everywhere. So you did have people sort of as a day of remembrance for the Great Panic, and that is something that actually persevered. It's kind of interesting how, after the war, quote-unquote, ended, you see a resurgence in these celebrations, especially when everybody gets back on track time-wise. But you see this incredibly dark day being an incredibly dark day for humanity, and people around the world in collective mourning on December 21st every year, and then, fast forward to Christmas. So, it was an interesting time, but on the train we didn't worry about that much, and again, we would lose track of time. So it would be, it was my birthday a few days ago. We didn't realize it, but it was. And it'd be like, happy birthday. And that'd be it. That would be the most you'd get out of people. Because you're not going to sit down and, every once in a long while, we would have somebody's birthday where people wanted to make a point of it. So people would get little trinkets or make little gifts or, bake a cake, which that was a particularly tricky thing to do sometimes just because of the ingredients involved. And then you would actually have this kind of celebration. It'd be a day of rest. We wouldn't drive anywhere. We would just sort of hang out, guard the train, scope out the area, and then sit down at the end of the day for this almost party. Or, some days, and that's if we really wanted to, make this an important day for somebody. And it would only be for people on the crew that, we thought really, really deserved it. Not that we went through and picked out, this guy deserves it, this one doesn't. But somebody would come to me and say, hey, do you think we could do such and such on this day because it's so-and-so's birthday and I want to make it special for them, And it was acknowledged throughout the crew that obviously we hadn't had something like that in a long time, most of the time. I mean, obviously you have a lot of people in the crew, but we hadn't had something like that in a very long time, so it was sort of an idea to us when you get that, when somebody's like, I want to make this a special day, everybody's like, you know what, sure, yeah, let's do that. It's the idea of, it's time to take a break. And if it wasn't time to take a break, then it'd be like, no, we have to be somewhere, blah, blah, blah. And, they might work up a little celebration in the evening, but everybody was fairly tired. So we celebrated some holidays. We didn't celebrate most of them. We celebrated some birthdays and we didn't celebrate most of them. It's every once in a while, when you have a real good reason, then you can, stop the train, sit down, and take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Which, meant a lot sometimes. Meant more than you could really figure, especially in a before the war state of mind where it's like, we get this day off and this day off. When you're really living day to day, taking a day for some sort of celebration has a lot more meaning than I'd really ever figured it would. So, it made me feel like, this must have been how, the pilgrims felt, especially on Thanksgiving. If you run into a place where they don't have much, or if you run into a place and you don't have much, and it's Thanksgiving, or it's some holiday, and they decide to sit you down, or you decide to sit them down, and, you either feel it, or you just see the gratitude of everybody, and, that was always amazing for me. So, it's very, very, very different than anything I've known. But, yeah, we did do a little bit of celebrating. We did, try to mix our work with play, even though work was to survive. We tried to have something. And I think when you're out like that, having something is really important. Because you otherwise you just get drowned in drowned in monotony. You get depressed. You know, people went literally crazy. They turned into Quizlings, which is what they called, but that's a topic for another day. Anyways, I'll see you guys next week. Train Man out.